Well, welcome to Overtime. This is the podcast for North Point where we take our conversation from Sunday a little bit further and a little bit deeper. It's a different voice than what you're used to hearing introducing our podcast today. I'm Julie Bjorkman. I am the North Point Online producer, so I am behind the camera often. You'll also see me sometimes on camera on Sundays. But this is my first time on the podcast.
Yes.
So like I said, I'm the North Point producer, the online producer. I also am the executive administrative assistant, so I help out Buck and Barry during the week. And I also am the admin assistant for the service programming department. So I just sort of...
You do like 4,000 things. Let's just be honest.
And I love it. I love it. It's great.
Yeah. And I love being partnered with you because so many times, my emails and my calendar and what I'm going to say, and you're like filtering so many things.
Yes,
so I love partnering with you.
If you could see my calendar and how many people's calendars I manage, it's very colorful and it's very confusing sometimes. But it's a great position. I love being part of everything that I'm doing here. And we enjoyed so much last week having Jordan interview you, Buck, and so we decided we would do it again.
I know, and you're doing it.
I'm doing it. Here we go.
Which I love. Yeah, I was so excited. I mean, before the podcast, we were talking, and I was like, Julie, you've got to do this because you're amazing. You really are. And you have seen so much behind-the-scenes stuff. I mean, so many times I'm like, Julie, what do you think of this idea? Or how should I respond here? And so... You have a really cool context, and like I say on Sunday sometimes, I get a front row seat. Like you get that front row seat too. Yes,
and it's really great, and and I love the culture we have here, where I'm able to kind of push against certain things and help guide and direct things, and everybody's so receptive from you and Jeremy and Jordan and Barry, and I love the collaborative environment we have here for all of our different environments and all of our different online things, and so it's fun to kind of be part of it now. So
exciting. Plus, I've never been interviewed on the Overtime podcast with somebody with a tattoo.
Yes.
So I'm so excited because of that.
Yes. This is, I call this my midlife crisis.
Yeah, I think it's cool. It's super colorful.
Thank you.
Got leaves and the whole thing.
And flowers. I enjoy it. Yes.
Yeah. Is there a meaning behind that?
There's really no meaning behind it. I just wanted flowers. The only thing that has a little bit of a meaning is when we were talking about different kinds, we threw in a golden poppy for California.
Oh, wow.
Because that's where I grew up. Don't hold it against me.
You were born there, right?
I was born there. I grew up in California, and so... But I'm a Texan now.
Yeah, Texan with a tattoo.
Texan with a tattoo.
On the Overtime podcast.
On the Overtime podcast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for allowing me to interview you. I think that we've got some really great things that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And I would love it if anybody who maybe didn't hear our Sunday conversation, if you could just recap kind of what you talked about.
Yeah, so Sunday we wrapped up this whole discussion in this series we've been in the last 3 weeks called Red and Blue, where we're talking about what's our way forward with politics and religion. And so I thought this Sunday would be a perfect time to go, let's kind of imagine the election is over. Like we have voted, the votes are tallied, boom, here's the results. It's President Biden or it's President Trump. And then I really challenged us to go what do you feel? What do you think? How are we going to react? And then the ultimate tension we dealt with this Sunday is, regardless of the results, whatever the results may be, how can we put our faith filter ahead of our political filter? And so we looked at a passage in Romans 13, which is an incredibly hard passage. And, I said that numerous times on in the message. And then ultimately we came to the conclusion that Paul was teaching us to honor those in authority, to honor our civil authorities, even if we disagree with them. We should be known as followers of Jesus, and I was really specific. This message is for followers of Jesus, that we honor. And so, we honor with our words, we honor with our actions, we honor with our attitudes. So regardless if you disagree with a political, guy or gal, that we're going to pray for them because that's honoring. We're going to watch every word that leaves our mouth because that's honoring. And if we do honor, I think that's our way forward. And it ultimately keeps our faith filter saying, God, this is so difficult. God, I don't want to. God, all these. But it keeps our faith filter that we'll be known for the way that we love. We'll be known for what Christ called us to be known for, to love as Christ loved. And so I just challenged everybody to say, hey, regardless of the outcome, honor. Because dishonoring puts your political filter ahead of your faith filter. Honoring puts your faith filter ahead of your political filter.
Yeah, I feel like this past week we have had a lot of opportunities to test that out between the debates and Trump getting COVID. And
Goodness.
So a lot of chances for us to really look at which filter we're putting first. Do you have any thoughts about that or things you've noticed?
About the debates?
About the debates, about social. I don't know if you look on social media, like what people are saying all over, but...
Yeah. It's, well, like I've said throughout the series, it's so polarized. It's amazing. Here, two things that just came to my mind. Number one is, regardless of what I say on Sunday, it's going in a political filter. Like, there are political buckets that are so defined today that it's like you can't say much without it going, without it being heard for what it is versus it being politicized. So it's like, if I'm saying, hey, put your faith filter and, honor, it's like, oh, you're a Democrat, oh, you're a Republican. I'm like, good Lord. I'm just saying I'm a follower of Jesus. That's what we need to be known for first. And so I think it's so politicized and it's so polarized and it's so divisive. And you see that in, the debates, you see that in our culture. And the other thing, just honestly speaking, I just think with such division and our culture being so polarized, I think we have an incredible opportunity, speaking to followers of Jesus Christ, if I can be so frank, to stop with the nonsense, to stop with all of the drama. I mean, I want to say, for goodness sakes, you are a follower of the Most High God, Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Have you lost sight of that? I mean, gosh, presidents come and go, but his kingdom lasts forever. And our instructions do not come from any other than Jesus Christ. And I'm just like, Christians, followers of Jesus, there needs to be some light in this darkness.
Gosh, yes.
There needs to be a light, our way forward, even though it is so difficult. Because, I'm tempted, I think we're all tempted to give in to the division and our emotions and, hey, I'm right and truth will prevail and da-da-da. Is to go, oh, okay, but what does love require of me? Mm-hmm. What does wisdom require of me? What is the light on the hill? Who's going to be the most mature one to go first? And that's why honoring is so dang hard. Depending on your political candidate, there's nothing in us that wants to honor. But we have an opportunity to be the light on the hill. And I would say that to all followers of Jesus listening, do something different, do something mature, do something that Christ would call us to do. And all the emotion, all the drama, the world's going to end, democracy's going to end, it's all done. I mean, hey, Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. This has come and gone before. But we have an opportunity, I think, to be ambassadors of Christ like never before in this political climate. So that's a long answer.
Sure, yeah. Well, and I love something that I feel like, I don't know if I heard you say this, or it's kind of just a thing that we, talk about here at North Point a lot, is our influence with outsiders and, how it can take us years and years and years to build up our influence with people from both sides of the political spectrum. And all it would take is just one post saying one thing to one side, and you've lost your influence with
100%.
half of your friends on Facebook,
Yeah.
And so I think just, for me personally, I grew up in an environment that was very political, and I knew everyone's opinions on every issue, and was not afraid to share them. I know you shared a story on Sunday or a couple Sundays ago about a friendship that you lost because of
100%.
And I was in the same boat when I was younger, not afraid to share, even if it was polarizing. And I think that realizing that my influence as a follower of Christ to people that I know is more important than letting them know my political stance on certain things.
100%.
So.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I've tried to balance as well throughout the series and just say, hey, be responsible politically. I think you should. I think you should know the issues. I think you should know the substance. I think you should be able to disagree without dishonoring. And disagree with fine, wonderful. I think you should protest, but for the help, not for the hurt. So I think all those are at play. But ultimately, I think the thing we can be known for is being a follower of Jesus.
Right.
Am I known for that before my political beliefs? Am I known for that, with my friends and colleagues? Are they like, man, I know their positions, but they're so honoring with their words. Their actions are, motivated by love.
Sure.
And, again, as a follower of Christ, that's what we're called to do. And
sure.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So on Sunday, you got into Romans 13, which you have said is a difficult passage.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
So if you just wanted to maybe give a little bit of background into that passage, why did Paul write it? What was going on in the time?
Sure. Yeah, I think, well, first, again, at the outset of the conversation, I think Romans 13, we could talk about this this podcast could be, 12 hours. It'd be long. I don't know what the longest podcast in history is, but we could maybe give it a run for his money. You
give Joe Rogan a run for his money with the long podcast.
I mean, he has some 4-hour podcasts. I'm like, goodness. But this, honestly, there's so many nuances. There's so many implications. There's so many how do you wrap your mind around that, Paul? So I tried to explain that and give a little disclaimer on Sunday before I jumped in. But I think the motivation, I think Paul was writing this because he knew that the followers of Jesus in Rome had this question. They're like, okay, you said Jesus is our Lord. Here's Nero just coming into power. Nero is a Christian killer. That's was his reputation, the butcher, the Christian killer. He built a whole Colosseum to kill Christians for sport and entertainment. People are showing up going, wow, look at all just a horrendous thing. Very evil, evil man. And now they're going, Paul, what do we do? Okay.
Right. So really nobody had the excuse of saying I don't have to honor because they're so terrible.
Right.
Paul was really at a time when it was as bad as you could get.
Yeah, and that's why the tax question seems like it's been from the beginning. They were like, Jesus, do we still pay taxes if we're a follower? Maybe that'll be incentive to become a Christian. But even, they're going, hey, here is such an evil guy, and do we need to pay taxes? Because ultimately taxes are going to funnel up to Rome. Do we need to do that? So that was a question they had. And then I personally think that Paul had a little bit of a secret mission in this letter. And I think part of the secret mission is he knew this letter would somehow get to officials and perhaps somehow get to Caesar. And he knew also that Caesar, with his reputation, and that followers of Jesus were saying, Jesus Christ is Lord. And what Nero wanted people to say is, Nero is Lord. So there was an obvious collusion course. And so I think there was a little secret thing that he was like, this letter's going to get in the hand of these officials, maybe it's into the hands of Nero, and I want us to be known for who we really are. And so he's like, honor these civil authorities. Don't rebel against them because God's put them in authority. So don't rebel because then you're rebelling against God. They're God's servants. And then I think kind of secretly he was like, okay, Nero, here's how you should govern. Reward the good. Well, what determines good? Well, hopefully that points to the very laws of God, the moral law. And I think he was saying, reward the good, punish the evil, be the sword of justice, and kind of giving them some insight into what it looks like to govern, at the same time saying, hey, followers of Jesus are not going to rebel against the Roman government.
And also, giving the Roman government a signal saying hey, we're not here to overthrow you. Yeah. This is a different...
Right. So I think, they were asking the question. Paul, in my opinion, had a little bit of a secret message to Caesar, but I also think it's a formative imperative is to say, this is what love requires of you, followers of Jesus, which requires an enormous amount of humility. And I think Paul's writing this to kind of shape the followers of Jesus, to see sanctification happen in the followers of Jesus, to see this big tension with, but if I don't say something, kind of what we see today, I must be known, I must get on social media and express all my opinions about, and it's Paul's kind of saying, almost to say, is there a humility piece? Is there a willingness to swallow some pride in this? Is there a willingness to be known as a follower of Jesus before all of your philosophical, political, points? And I think Paul was pushing that pretty hard in Romans 13. So I think all of that was part of it, why he wrote it.
Yeah, and and all of these things like swallowing our pride and, putting the other person first, doing what love requires of us, what is it that makes that so hard? Because obviously it is. Otherwise, you wouldn't see the kind of division we have and the kind of, anger and, headbutting that we see today.
Yeah, I think, so there's a lot of reasons why it's hard. And I think, there's this line of almost, where does our responsibility begin and end, and where does God's sovereignty kind of pick up that responsibility and where it begins and ends? And I think there's something in us that just cries for this, we must control. And to a point that we're willing to lose influence, to a point that we're willing to sever relationships, because our political truth is right. And so we're willing to stand on the truth, which we call truth, regardless of what it costs. And I think what's lost in all of that, and this is just one angle, but I think what's lost in all of that is the sovereignty of God. God's got it. Like, again, presidents come and go, but God's kingdom lasts forever. And I think the sovereignty piece of God makes this discussion, makes Romans 13 crazy, crazy hard, because that you got to go palms up. You've got to open your hands, not in this weird passive way, but to go like, God, I truly trust that your ways are better than my ways. And so Sunday I ask questions. I'm like, hey, is it possible that God's ways are better than your ways? Is it possible that God's working things you perceive as bad, like you're perceiving, oh, democracy's over, our government's over, United States of America is going to hell in a handbasket, Is it possible that God is doing something, even if the guy gets elected this year, that you don't want to get elected?
Sure.
Is God doing something good? So that's a sovereignty piece. And so, the Bible's full of God's sovereignty. I wrote a couple of these passages down. I said, like Romans 11:34 says, who can fathom the mind of God? And again, it's just a reminder to go, okay, it starts with a premise. God is real. God exists. God is love. God is just. God is working. And God is going to accomplish his purposes. If that's your baseline, your premise, then God's, we can't fathom the mind of God. We're infinite creatures. We're finite creatures. He is infinite. So his ways are far beyond ours. I think of, the letter of Job. In the letter of Job, there's 77 questions at the end of the letter that God is basically saying, Job, I created the whole universe. I hung the sphere, the earth, in kind of nothingness. I created the waves and the boundaries of the waves. Where were you when I did all these creative orders? In other words, God's saying, do you know I'm God and you're not, Job?
Yeah.
Like, I am sovereign, and Job, I love you. And I know in the midst of all the circumstances, you're going, nah, I'm going to doubt that. And that's legit, that's human. But ultimately, it's coming back to the place. God is sovereign, God is working, God is just, God is loving, and God is working his plans for the good. Romans 8 says God works for the good of those who love him and call according to, like, God is working this for the good. And so I think Romans 13, the foundational piece of it is you have to embrace the sovereignty of God. And if you don't, if that's like our point of disagreement, like, I got to control, it's my opinions are best, it's my truth is best. And if it's not honestly going, God is sovereign, and maybe there's another place or another aspect. He is. If an individual can't get there, then Romans 13 is like, you're done. Like, sure. It's just, you're going to reject it because it requires holding on to the sovereignty of God. And that makes it really tough, because that's tough.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Now, one of the questions that I feel like has been brought up, we've kind of heard it, like, oh, somebody asked me this in a small group, somebody commented this on a post I saw online. Mm-hmm. What about evil leaders? Because, Paul talks about how every authority that's been put in place has been put there by God.
Yeah.
And
even the bad ones.
Even the bad ones. Mm-hmm. So the question is there ever a time that we ought to rebel against leaders? Like, when their evilness is so bad that we can't do what they're asking us to do. Mm-hmm. Like, at what point do we say, like, I'm sorry, I honor you as an authority in your position, but I have to, civil disobedience. I'm going to rebel.
Yeah, here it comes. Yeah, so I mentioned this on Sunday, and I just said, hey, we're going to talk about it. So I think there are a couple things to keep in mind. I think one, in the sovereignty of God, one of the things I said is that in this age, which is in this current age, before Jesus comes back and establishes his kingdom and, God reigns over the whole world, we're left in this age with a state of secular leaders. So there's a state of leaders that believe in God, a state of leaders who don't believe in God, a state of leaders who believe in other gods. So we have this kind of hodgepodge of all these leaders. And God, in this current age, before Christ comes back and establishes the kingdom, and God is the king of all, he leverages secular leaders. He wills his governing kind of purposes through secular leaders, which means good and bad. And I think at a very, very surface level, there are injustices that happen in the world that are punished, that justice is carried out by a leader that we would categorize as bad. There's a murder that happens. There's a abuse that happens. And because there's a point leader who we would say is evil, they have still established justice in that realm. So the person who murdered the innocent individual, well, under a bad leader, that person is still, justice is carried out on their life. So there's a lot of examples of that to where you can see like, okay, that can make sense at a very basic level, that these bad leaders have instituted some good things in their authority. But then it comes to, but what if it's like almost all bad? What if they're like rewarding the bad and punishing the good? And it's like at a point to go, whoa, can we disobey? Or, civil disobedience. So I wrote down a couple things. One, I think it's interesting to think about the United States of America is established on civil disobedience.
Yes.
I'm like, the Declaration of Independence, from, that we fought for, and civil disobedience was at the heart of what we did to establish this nation and the 13 colonies. And, we wrote the Declaration of Independence to kind of say, hey, this is our, independence from Great Britain. Like, we're disobeying. Like, we're going to, rebel against you. I think that's interesting to know. And then I think, 100 years approximately after the Declaration of Independence was written, I wrote down the Civil War happened. And the Civil War was civil disobedience, and it was rebelling. And it was around the whole idea of, these states must submit to the laws of the Union, especially the laws around slavery. And then there's like, big, and 500,000 people die. And then 100 years after that, which is really interesting to think about, we see the Civil Rights Movement, which was about the segregation laws because of the color of your skin. And at that point, the laws that were on the books, we were like, no, we're going to disobey, or, civil disobedience. And so I think it's interesting to think first about the United States of America was founded on this. Sure. So there's a place for it. But then you go, well, what about God? Where's God? Does God approve of this? Are we just continually, like Jesus says, turn the other cheek?
Sure.
Because that's a real tension.
Yeah.
And I wrote down several examples in the Bible. I think in Acts 5:29, Peter is arrested and for preaching Jesus. And the civil authorities said, you cannot bring up the name of Jesus again. And he goes, all right, well, I'm going to rebel against you.
Well, sorry, yeah.
He rose from the dead. I mean, I saw him. It's one of those things. He is God in a body. So, like, if you arrest me, you kill me. I mean, that's like the worst you can do is kill me. So, I'm going to rebel. So, Peter rebels. We see that with the apostles. And then, Old Testament examples, I think Daniel in the lion's den, if you grew up in church, Sunday school story, you couldn't pray. And then he's very public with his prayer. And he prays and oh my gosh, civil disobedience, get thrown in the lion's den, and, incredible story. And
he had the option too. I mean, he could have continued to pray behind closed doors and nobody would have known.
Right.
And he decided, no, this is what I'm doing. And
he's very public with his civil disobedience.
Yeah.
And so, there's an example there. And then I think in Daniel as well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Rakshak and Benny.
Yeah. Those are, you told me
from
this.
VeggieTales.
Yes. I should know this. My kids have watched VeggieTales before.
I know. We should have queued up the song to play.
Yeah. I think I tuned out when those things happen.
Probably.
Like you're exhausted from work. They're like, okay, they're watching VeggieTales. You're like, I don't know what they're actually saying.
Everybody's quiet for 10 minutes. Like, I'm just going to sit here and tune out for a minute.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah. I think, anyways. So, I mean, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or whatever names you...
Rakshak and Benny.
Yeah, Radshak and Benny. Yeah. That's it. Okay. They were called, hey, you got to bow down, and they're like, no, and they get thrown. I mean, civil disobedience. You see it there. I think the story of Moses and Exodus. There's midwives and Pharaoh's like, hey, I'm going to kill the firstborn, or I'm going to kill all the boys, and they're like, I'm going to rebel against those laws. So there's several different others that I wrote down, but I think the point I just wanted to make is from a biblical perspective, when you're looking at the scriptures, and if you're leveraging that as the foundation for the response to the question, is it okay? Is there examples of this where God permits it? The answer is yes. You can. There are moments to disobey, or I keep saying disobey, but it's for civil disobedience.
Sure, and it seems like a common thread of this is if the authorities are asking you to sin or to go directly against what God has said, like don't bow down to anybody but me, and Rakshak and Benny
sure
didn't want to bow down to the king, and it seems like that's sort of the common thread is you're the authority until you ask me to go against God, who's the higher authority.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, there are examples, but I think the temptation to take those examples is then kind of open the floodgates and say, now I can disobey anytime I want. Now I can rebel against the authorities because I found, something in the Bible that said.
Obscure verse, or my conscience says that I should,
Sure, yeah, and it's like, all that, it's now there's permission to disobey. So I think we do need to be careful with that.
So what is, like, if, we've clearly there's a precedent set in Scripture, and in history, modern history, like what's the context for that? Like what are the parameters that you kind of would set in place? Yeah.
So this now begins to get in the discussion where it's very, very difficult, and this is where there's so many, what about this example? What about that example? This is where we could spend hours. And really what we're trying to get to the heart of is wisdom. What does wisdom require of us? And I say that because in Proverbs chapter 26, it says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like them. The following verse says, answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes. So all of a sudden you're like, what is it? Well, that is the heart of wisdom. And the heart of wisdom is it's both. You know what it is? Like answer, don't answer, don't answer, which means we have to invite God into this conversation, which means it's like not of our own wisdom, but of his wisdom. Lean not in your own understanding. Trust in the Lord in all your ways. And so this is where it becomes very difficult. I don't think there is this pragmatic, written law. Here's the black and white when you do and don't. I think this is a wisdom conversation, and this is going to require us to go, hey, when is it okay for civil disobedience, and when does wisdom require of us to do that? So I think the first part is seeking wisdom is an imperative. The other part is Jesus says in Matthew 7, take the big old log. This is the passage that people go, oh, don't judge. If you're a Christian, you can't judge, which I'm like, I don't think you can live without judging.
Yeah, we judge everything. I'll do
everything. Like, stop judging. I'm like, I can't. This is like human function.
Right. I mean, Oreos are clearly better than broccoli, right?
100%. Yes. And so Jesus' point is not to judge. Jesus is like, judge rightly. Judge with humility, judge with wisdom. So he's like, okay, first, take the massive plank out of your eye, deal with what's going on. So there's humility, there's pride, there's, what's in the way of you being able to see clearly wisdom. Take that out. Deal with that first, which puts you in a posture of humility, which begins to recognize, be self-aware of your pride. Be self-aware, why is this political thing so important to me?
It's so hard. It's so hard. I mean, because really getting down to the, why do I care so much about this issue? Because sometimes it's, big issues that really will affect, your money or your,
100%.
Where you can live. But sometimes it's just things that you just want to be right about.
Yeah.
And, I felt that myself, and why is that? Why is it so hard to have somebody say you're wrong? And instead of looking at am I wrong? Am I really wrong? You just want to jump back and say, no, I'm not, I'm right. This is the hill I will die on today.
Right. And then, even the deeper question is, why is it so important for you to be right?
Yeah.
Hey, again, there's a practical side of this. Hey, taxes, immigration, race issues, those are important things. And I think we should understand those issues. I think we should be responsible with those. I think we should be able to voice our opinion and give some substance as to why we would say those are right. But then it comes to a place, are you working to be utterly free of the things in your life that are actually clouding your ability to see wisdom, to answer the fool or not answer the fool? And I'm just telling you, I think the posture and our disposition is the first and foremost, I think, all throughout the scriptures that say, hey, before you act, because yes, there is a time to do it, but before you act, check your heart. Before you act, check your attitude, check your pride. Where are you at with humility? Why is it so important for you to be right? I mean, if I'm sitting down with somebody, that's the first thing I'm saying. Why is this so important to you? Well, what if that doesn't happen? Well, what if we do pay more taxes? Well, what if, what does that mean? And then why is it so important? So I think that, and that doesn't mean we should or should not. I just think that's a really good kind of filter or check. And then I wrote down 4 things, and I just said, I think these 4 things are a grid. So, hopefully this is helpful. But in terms of civil disobedience, I said, number 1, is the atrociousness and the grievousness of the law, is it to the place to go like, whoa. Mm-hmm. Like at this point, we've got to do something. So, and I think there's a big difference. There's like a traffic law. Well, I just disagree with the traffic law of driving 65 on this road. I think we should drive 100. Okay, is that grievous? Is that bumping into our conscience to a degree to go like, this is wrong in every sense of the way? This is hurting life. Mm-hmm. And so if thousands of people are dying as a result of a certain law, if it's like, traffic laws versus murder, I mean, these are really, really important to go, okay, at some point, if it's atrocious or the grievousness of this law, we've got to act and rise up. So sure. I think that would be one. I think the second that I would say is a grid is I wrote down the extent of the unjust law's effect. In other words, is this affecting just one person? I mean, or is this affecting thousands of individuals? And I think that's really important to put in your grid to go, is this minor or is this a major thing? And then I think the third piece of the grid to go, should I or shouldn't I, is the potential of civil disobedience act to bear clear and effective witness to the truth. So if I'm going to have this civil disobedience against this, is this actually going to get to the heart of what I'm trying to get to? Is this going to make things better?
Or are you just rebelling to make a statement?
Exactly. Like is sitting here, or I wrote down like protesting, is this getting to the intended effect? Like if I choose to, whatever it is, whatever expression of my civil disobedience, is it actually getting to the heart of what your heart is broken about? Or is it really just going, it's additive. You're just adding to the noise.
Sure.
You're just making things worse.
Sure.
Is it that? So I think it's, the potential of civil disobedience act to bear clear and effective witness to the truth. Is it what you're doing, is that pointing people to something that's far better? And then I think the fourth point is the movement of a spirit of courage and conviction of followers of Christ reaching a flashpoint. So a flashpoint is this moral kind of indignation in history. Like, this cannot morally happen any longer. I'm not so sure about taxes.
Sure.
But is it to a point to where, this is so intolerable. The evil is so wrong. There's a collective conscience. We have to do something now. Is there a flashpoint? So Jesus said there's a flashpoint in the temple.
Sure.
You have turned my Father's house into a den of robbers. I am flipping some tables, baby.
Getting mad and yeah.
Yeah, and so that was a civil that was this point to go like no longer. Like I'm going to okay. And so I think those 4 things is what I would say. And I think those 4 things with a healthy posture, your internal disposition. Why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. Have you kind of checked the logs in your eye before you're about to go throw some stones here? And then I think you got to go through this grid. And this is, the things I wrote down, it requires a lot of thought. And it requires a lot of processing and inviting God in. Should I answer full according to his folly or not? You got to invite God in, because there's going to be some times that you're going to have to turn the cheek, mm-hmm. and that's what wisdom requires of you. And there's going to be some times you're going to need to flip some tables.
Sure.
And but I do think there has to be a process in that, and so I would give this grid.
I like it. It's great.
Yeah.
I think too. I think for me personally, I have found a lot of help relying on other people that I find to be wise, mm-hmm. asking God for his wisdom also, but, running things by like, am I overreacting over this? Like, should I be getting this mad? And, sometimes, especially we're talking about like social media posts on, like, this is really, really bugging me. Like,
right.
Do I just need to like take a breath and step back, or like, should I say something? And usually the answer is, it's not worth it. Just take a breath. Mm-hmm. It's not, you're not going to convince them.
Yeah.
it's just going to ruin your relationship. So is your relationship more important than being right in the situation?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's such a great piece of wisdom, because I think it gives us added perspective, added context, and especially if we're willing to talk to somebody who's going to look us in the eyes and go, I just think this is more about your agenda. Mm-hmm. I think this is more about, or somebody who's willing to say, I think you've made politics your idol.
Yes.
Like, hey, let's go back to old school 10 Commandments, have no other gods before me. Like, start right there. Number one, uno. And saying, I think you're putting your hope, your trust, your confidence in presidents and politics, and you've lost sight of your King of all kings, which is Christ, and his kingdom.
Yes, which will still be there after this whole election cycle's done, after the next election cycle's done.
Yeah, which I think that's just fair. I think it's like, hey, if you really want to make a difference, if you really do, man, are you willing to sit down with somebody who's willing to say, hey, I think you're into this idol thing? I think that you have just put your hope and confidence, or your passions are far greater for politics than for Jesus. Can we start there?
Yes.
And then if you're like, passions are for Jesus and as a follower of Christ again, and man, you're taking the logs out of your eye, you're inviting God into the equation, then, let's start there, and then let's talk about civil disobedience and should we rise up because of X, Y, or Z.
Sure.
Yeah. But I would say, were you about to say something?
No, I was just going to ask if you had any other things you wanted to share, any other comments? Or?
Well, again, this stuff, like, I think there's so many what-abouts and what-ifs. So I just would say that if you're listening and you're going, Buck, what about, what if? Fair, totally fair, and I want you to know that. And it requires a lot of discussion before we go public, because again, first and foremost, we're to be known as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. Jesus says they're going to know you by the way that you love. Is this what love requires of you? Or does humility require you to take some shots? Does humility require you to kind of swallow your pride a little bit and be able to listen and be able to seek to understand before being, seeking to be understood? I think that's a really important piece of it, but I also think that there are flashpoints, as I mentioned, the fourth piece of the grid. So a flashpoint for civil disobedience and I wrote down some of these, so this is a little bit that I would say, giddy up, let's go, is if the government defines what part of the Bible we can read. Going, hey, the Bible's no longer, like, hey, we're going to take the New Testament out. We're going to take these 8 letters out of the Bible. At that point, I think we're having discussions around what does it look like. What does wisdom, what does love require of us? Because there's civil disobedience at hand. I wrote down, if government takes our children, my children or our children, out of our homes because we taught them that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and how Jesus defined things. Now, all of a sudden, we're going, okay.
That's a big deal.
Like, there's a point to go, that's a flashpoint. That's the flipping of the tables in the temple. Now it's time. But there's wisdom in that. I think I wrote down, if the government says Christians are no longer allowed to work or participate, if that discrimination begins to happen because of being a follower of Jesus Christ, and now you can't provide, living, now you can't, work here, now you can't go to these certain places because you're a follower of Jesus. I think at that point, that's a consideration for a flashpoint.
Sure.
And then I think I wrote down, if the government says we can no longer use the name of Jesus because Jesus is, teaches hate speech, or Jesus leads to a place that, that has opposing viewpoints of relationships or family or culture. And so therefore the name of Jesus is illegal. At that point, that's a law that goes against the very laws of God that I think would be a flashpoint to go, okay, let's sit around and talk about what does wisdom require of us now? What does civil disobedience look like? That is a beginning of a list. And I think lists get dangerous because then you get in the really pragmatic, okay,
This isn't a list, this is not,
Yeah, which brings us back to the Proverbs passage that says, answer fool, don't answer fool. What is it, God?
Which one?
I want black and white. Well, I think wisdom is the answer. So are you willing to invite God in? Are you willing to check your attitude? Are you willing to ask the questions, why is this so important to me? Why is being right? And are you willing to say, hey, this may be an idol. Maybe I've put my hope and trust in politics way more than I put my hope and trust in Christ. So I think I would add that to the conversation.
I think that's great. And, I think that this has been a really helpful conversation. I know that you kind of touched on some of these things Sunday, and so I'm glad that you had the chance to go a little bit deeper. And I hope that you all found this helpful. And I just want to thank y'all for joining us, for tuning in for the last 3 weeks of Red and Blue, talking about the way forward with politics and religion. And thanks for joining us for Overtime. And we will see you again on October 18th.
So exciting.
When we reopen for in-person services, we will be streaming live in person and online at 9:30 and 11. And we will see you then.
Yes. Hey, Julie. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You did
Thank you.
amazing.
No, thanks. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.